Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and sponsored by Omnovos, Canada's retail customer engagement solutions provider, combining data, software, and services to help retailers create and deliver real-time personalized content in your customers' moments of truth. In this special feature episode, a full-length interview with one of the sharpest minds in corporate strategy in the world, Roger Martin is my special guest. One of the original founders of Monitor Company, transformative dean of the now globally top-ranked Rotman School of Business at University of Toronto, and author of many influential papers and books, Roger and I talk about the nature of strategy and where it's gone wrong, the big bets retailers need to make to survive through the COVID-19 crisis, consumer habits versus loyalty, and his new book, Where More is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency, coming out this September. Let's jump right in now to my interview with Roger Martin, live from Florida. Roger, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you're safe. These are unusual times. Hope you and your family are safe. I believe you're south of the border when we are speaking right now. So again, I hope everything is safe and secure, and life is good for you there.
Life is good. I'm in Fort Lauderdale with my wife here, and we're safe and sound, and sort of out of the center of the COVID flare-ups. Miami and Miami Beach are a little more hotspots than this. So doing fine, thank you.
Well, let's start off. I know you. I know your transformative run as the dean of the Rotman School of Business at U of T. But for the listeners who may not be as familiar with you, give us a sense of your personal professional journey and tell us about yourself and what you do today.
Sure. Well, for your listeners in Canada, I started in Wallenstein, Ontario. So I grew up in a town of then 50 people. It's a metropolis now. I think it's at least maybe 300 people now.
Progress.
Yeah, no, really. But ended up going to university and business school in Boston and falling in with a bunch of folks who decided the world needed another strategy consulting firm. And so I was one of the people who helped build Monitor Company to a big international firm. But I was, as I always say, I was minding my own business, consulting to a Canadian client. It was called Moore Corp, that happened to be headquartered. Its offices were in Chicago, so I was working out of the head office, Cambridge, and consulting to a company in Chicago that was Canadian and had Ed on the board. Rob Pritchard was then the boy wonder president of University of Toronto, right. And he got it in his head that I should be the dean of his business school, which was one of its laggard faculties, and he felt it had potential, and he's very persuasive, so he talked me in 1998 into taking over as the dean of the business school, and I did that for 15 years. It was lots of fun. We did a lot of bold things, so I enjoyed that. Then I stayed on for another 6 years to run something called the Martin Prosperity Institute and do a big project on the future of democratic capitalism. But then I retired from University of Toronto in the summer of 2019, so last summer, and I've gone back to doing the two things I like most, which is writing and advising CEOs on strategy. And so those are the two things I do now.
You know, one of the things I enjoyed most about listening to you is how you framed strategic choices. And I was listening to one of your discussions around big bets and the big bets that we all make or leaders make around strategy. For example, you know, you articulated one of your big bets around taking the gig at U of T and transforming that program was that the alumni would have to both qualitatively and quantitatively, you know, with donations and otherwise support, which I did. I thought it was amazing transformation. It was what you called a big bet. For my listeners, what are the big bets? Given that we're in this COVID period, we've basically hit a circuit breaker on the economy. I start to run out of adjectives for describing what's going on. 25 million unemployed in America. And what are the big bets that retailers, C-level retailers, need to be thinking about now to make sure that there's a tomorrow that happens for them? How do they conceive of this, and what are those big bets they should be thinking about?
Well, let me first start about why I use that terminology, and then go into it. But why the terminology bets? And the reason I do that is because in strategy, you have to make bets. One of the things I dislike most about how strategy has evolved as a practice out in the world is it's become this very analytical thing. You crunch all the numbers and analyze everything to determine your strategy. That is a way to fail and fail miserably. Right? It's the dominant way, which is the sad thing. And the reason actually goes back, for what it's worth, all the way to Aristotle, who invented science. He was the world's first scientist and invented the concepts of science that were formalized in the scientific revolution by Newton, Bacon, Galileo, Descartes, 2,000 years later. But the father of science pointed out, said that analyzing the past scientifically and rigorously is only good for the part of the world that cannot be other than it is. So if I hold a pen in my hand, I let go of it, it'll drop. It'll drop now. It dropped last week. It'll drop next week. It'll drop 100 years from now. It'll drop in Antarctica. It'll drop in Europe. It'll drop. It is part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. Gravity works everywhere all the time, and pens drop when you let go.
Universal. It's a law. It's a universal law. It's going to happen.
That's right. But what the father of science pointed out, and has been ignored entirely by the modern world, is that there's another part of the world. It's part of the world where things can be other than they are. And if you imagine the world out there, so many consumer behaviors change, so many cultural things change. All of the things. That's the part of the
new viruses. New
viruses, absolutely. And I'll link this to the virus too, which is he said, in that part of the world, don't use my method. Don't use the scientific method, because think about it. If you analyze the past, what will it tell you about the future? It'll be the same.
Right. Like they say in the mutual funds, right?
Yes.
Basically, past performance, no indication.
Yes, that's right. And so what he said, in that part of the world, the rigor means imagining possibilities and choosing the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. So interesting. It's very different than how most people think about strategy. That's why all strategy is a bet. It's imagining a possibility and using non-scientific things to snip it here, snip it there, things we believe, things we understand, not scientific. And so all good strategy is the result of a bet where your goal is to change the world, right? This is why we love Steve Jobs. He wanted to dent the universe. The only way you can dent the universe is by changing it. The only way you can change something is by making bets that you then make come true. And so it's very interesting, the dialogue now about science and the pandemic. But everybody's screaming and yelling that we should listen to the scientists, listen to the scientists, listen to the scientists. Aristotle, the original and most important scientist who's ever walked this planet, would say only so far. So
interesting.
He would say well, here's my analysis of what I think he would say. All the scientists used all the data we could in the past to come up with a curve for the United States. 220,000 to 2.2 million were going to die. That was what science said. Then they said, no, we must bend the curve. We must do these mitigation things to bend the curve. Now, if you knew what those things were going to do and there was science behind them, you'd have put it in that first curve. But it wasn't, because we don't have science on those, because we've never tried them before in a situation like this, in a context like this. And guess what's happening?
Not at the scale, right? Not at the scale or scope.
Yeah,
right?
Or with this kind of virus either, honestly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't, wasn't something we did. And so they were being profoundly unscientific. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? I'm saying that's what Aristotle, right, the world's greatest scientist, would say. If you're trying to create, what he said is, in the part of the world where things can be other than they are, the purpose of human beings is to be the cause of a new effect. They were trying to be the cause of a new effect, i.e. bending the curve. So that is what you have to do when you want to create a future that's different from the past, right? And so you have to make bets. And so the bets I made at the Rotman School were all bets, and they either work out better or worse. They don't all work out great. But if we come to retailers are going to have to make a bet or a series of bets about the future. And does that mean they can ignore the past entirely? No, but they can't crunch the past to say, well, this is what people did in the past. Analytically, they came 1.5 times a week to purchase this much stuff, and so that's what we can say analytically is the case. No, you're going to have to ask fundamental questions like, what are people like? What do they seek? What will make them comfortable? Because people are comfort-seeking, habit-forming people. So I wrote an HBR article on this, but customer loyalty is highly overrated.
Right, great article. I remember that you wrote it with A.G. Lafferty, former president of P&G. Yeah, right.
It's habit. And so people more so than they have a loyalty to Tide, they have a habit of buying Tide, where their subconscious says, just do this, because it's the most comfortable thing to do. So all retailers now have to recognize that COVID-19 is breaking a whole bunch of habits. Right? They say if you want to lose weight or become fit, you have to do it for like 6 weeks. So that, and at that point, your body sort of says, "Well, this is the thing I do." Well, this COVID-19 is going to be more than that 6 weeks number. All sorts of habits have been broken with respect to how you buy things through the retail channel. So retailers are going to have to ask the question: one, in what way are the broken habits problematic for me? And what can I do to formulate new habits, make it easier for customers who I want to come to my retail establishment to do that, right? So that they reestablish a new habit. There's going to be no formula for that, but just understanding those customers best as possible. Will creating that new habit mean having a fantastic new loyalty program that is much more luxurious, much more beneficial than you've ever done before, to get them into the habit of coming back into your retail environment, your store? Is it going to be to make sure that you are projecting things that the subconscious, right? Lots of things you try to project to the conscious never influence the subconscious. So subconsciously, the subconscious wants to avoid danger and things that feel uncomfortable. So if feeling uncomfortable is feeling like, I don't know if this store is clean or not, right? It's something that's going to cause the subconscious to say, I'm just going to walk by, or I'm not even going to plan on going in because my subconscious is screaming at me, I'm not comfortable. Kind of, what are the things that you can do, right, to help reinforce the subconscious's comfort about doing the thing you're doing and getting you to reestablish a habit or create a brand new habit. Because what is very clear, right, and this is retailing too, a form of retailing is they're developing habits of getting stuff online, right, to a greater extent. That's becoming a habit. They're down the learning curve, and the mind is saying, the subconscious is saying, well, that worked really great the last 10 times. Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
You've really hit on the one area that I've been thinking about the most, which is online grocery. And I did some work looking at online grocery penetration rates across the world. And South Korea has the highest. And it's not just because they have density, which helps, of course, the business model, but it's also because they seem to, the providers seem to have done enough iterations with enough consumers that they formed the habit.
Yes.
And here in Canada and the U.S., not so different. 1-2% maybe in the U.S., maybe 3-4% of groceries were done online because people just didn't have the habit. They had the habit of rolling the cart into the store, and now they're experiencing. I had a delivery this morning from Grocery Gateway actually, and I'll do another one, and then I'm like, well, why would I go back to the store? Because it's a great behavior that is, I think of it like a wormhole. I think it was going to happen anyway, but we've just advanced that anyway, particularly like 5 years.
Yeah, I think
we'll go.
I think I think it's a step function kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But have you looked at some of the things that they did to make it an easier habit to adopt in Korea?
Well, some of it was they were just relentlessly good because of the density of delivery. In other words, they could get it there reliably the same time, and they did a really good job of order fulfillment, for example. So, order completion has always been the tripping point for online grocery. I ordered 10 things. Sorry, I'm out of one of them. Then you go, well, I just got to go to the grocery store now anyway. And that's what has tripped up many of these online grocers in the past. So in South Korea, they did that really well. England does that well, though these days, not so much. Some of the big startups are really struggling just for the demand, right? They're trying to flex to the demand.
But they did also some cool stuff. And I don't know how, I'm no expert on Korean retailing, but I've seen pictures of their displays in subways where you see the pictures of it and you can push the button and order, right? So make it seamlessly part of their workflow. Like I've worked for a lot in B2B businesses where the absolute key is to integrate your offering into their workflow. Mm-hmm. Right, so I was on the board of Thomson when it became Thomson Reuters too, for a decade and a half, and their Thomson's best product is Westlaw, and the secret to Westlaw is integration into the workflow of the lawyers. So it wasn't you have to get out of your workflow, do something, and then get back into your workflow. It's in the middle of your workflow, all you do is type in these things into your Westlaw portal, and voila, it'll get you the stuff instantly that you used to have to sort of step out of your workflow to go to the law library and get somebody to look up a bunch of cases for you. So, and then we built a big business in tax and accounting using the same principles, but it's a more universal principle, which is that you, Michael, have a workflow to your life, right? And if you've got to step out of that workflow and do something that you're not used to doing, or something that's hard for you to do, right? You're less likely to do it, and you won't value it nearly as much as if it's seamlessly in your workflow. And so figuring out for any service, what's the workflow, the current workflow of the consumer? How can I make my offering as easy as possible? And here's where retailers are challenged. The workflow of the average kind of person, often a female, but not always, the person taking care of the family, mm-hmm. was to
70+%.
Was to go shopping at their grocery store every week, or if they have a big family, several times a week. Well, that workflow has been actually, and so integrating into that what meant having a store that was close enough to them, right? And having a parking lot in which they could park their car, not they have to search for parking, whatever that gets out of the optimal workflow. So the workflow is a place that's close with a parking lot, and then I do my thing, get the groceries back, take them back home. Well, they're not going to be doing that, and so They will be developing a new workflow. Now you have to either get them back into the old workflow by reminding them how well that workflow worked for them, how pleasurable mm-hmm. it was, how good it was for them, or they will continue with whatever new workflow they've designed to cope with COVID-19.
Right. And with whatever new retailer they have done that with, whether they're in Canada, we draw these squiggly lines between essential and non-essential. So the essential folks are just trying to keep up, hire people, get supply chain, and the non-essentials are scratching their heads saying, my business is maybe curbside pickup. In Ontario, for example, Canadian Tire is now they've been deemed now non-essential, so they're only path to revenue is online or curbside delivery. Very different habits for the average Canadian tire shopper. So,
and here it's
such a revolution.
Yes. And here, some of our favorite restaurants here have got nice curbside pickup, and so our La Bamba, our favorite Mexican place, our La Bamba habit hasn't changed at all, or hardly at all. Whereas our habit for some of the other places has disappeared completely.
Right.
And
you talk about one of those restaurants in your book, actually, and you use it as an explainer. I hope they're still there and still trying.
Oh
to,
yes, Joe's. I've been in Joe's Stone Crab. Yeah, a great restaurant, and I've been in communication with Stephen Sowitz, the fourth generation owner of it, and he says, it's tough, but they will manage their way through it.
Well, it's a good segue. Let's talk about, you got a new book coming out in the fall, I believe, When More Is Not Better. So let's segue to talk about that. When I reviewed some of the work, I read the kind of galley version of it, and the genesis feels like it came out of the extensive work you did at the Martin Prosperity Institute, that trying to understand this modern face of capitalism. I think it's actually a lifetime pursuit for you, is trying to understand this capitalism and what that should look like. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. In fact, when I stepped down as dean, the beloved and now late Joe Rotman, and then the then president David Naylor said, "Please don't go. Stay. We like your contribution around here." And so I stayed and took over the Martin Prosperity Institute, which was named that only because my beloved friend and late friend Joe Rotman, he wanted to say thanks for doing a good job at the Rotman School after my first decade there, and he said, "I will give you $10 million to set up a research institute of any sort you want, to do anything you want, but it's got to have Martin in the name. Otherwise, I won't give you the money," because he knew otherwise I'd say, "No, Joe."
Right.
So it's actually named after my parents, but officially. So I went to the Martin Prosperity Institute to run that and do a project on the future of democratic capitalism, because this was 2013. Because in 2013, I was worried about the increasing inequality and the stagnation of the middle class. In particular, I focused in on the stagnation of the median family. And I did focus it on America. So the book is called When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. But I studied America because it's the lead in this problem, which is a stagnation.
But I'm sure the
middle class.
I'm sure the lessons are equal, or not, if not equal, relevant on both sides of the border. I'm sure.
Yes. What I would say is that Canada is going to experience what the U.S. is experiencing, to not quite the extent and not quite as fast, but it's heading in that direction. And so that was what I studied. I studied for 6 years, had a great team there, and the book is the product of that work. And it's coming out on September 29th. You can pre-order it on Amazon already. But my core conclusion in the book, as the subtitle suggests, is that the American economy has benefited greatly from a pursuit of efficiency, ever increasing amounts of efficiency that started essentially with the influence of Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations the same year America declared independence. And has followed through to people like David Ricardo on comparative advantage, and Frederick Winslow Taylor on scientific management, and Edwards Deming on total quality, toward ever more embracing efficiency. And that worked essentially great without negative consequences for 200 years, 1776 to 1976. Since then, there's been such an obsession with efficiency that's manifested itself in the use of all sorts of proxies for efficiency that have turned a good thing into a bad thing. And one thing is this sort of complete elimination of slack and buffers. And so we hear all sorts of complaints about we didn't have enough PPE, right? Personal protective equipment, masks, gowns, etc., ventilators, etc. Why?
Toilet paper.
Yeah, toilet paper. Why? Why were we short of that? Well, it's because in the modern climate of efficiency, all of that stock sitting around not being used would be considered inefficient. And so we are running the entire economy that way, saying Slack is bad, connect everything together, retailing. This is, a great, retailing is a great example. Have staffing algorithms that cut down excess staffing to absolutely the bone, because that's inefficient. Well, it turns out that companies, and if you haven't had her on your program, you should. Zeynep Ton, who wrote a great book called The Good Job Strategy, which is the best thing written on retailing in the last 20 years at least, demonstrates that places like Costco actually figure out what the algorithm says and then add a substantial double-digit percentage to that, to just say the consumer experience, the shopper experience is going to be so much better if there's excess staff to help them out that aren't racing around trying to just do their basic job, that our sales per square foot and our profitability will be higher. And it is. Same with Trader Joe's, same with Quick Trip, C-store chain Mercadona in Spain. These are companies that say that essentially say elimination of Slack may seem like efficient, but in the end, the efficiency gains that you made from that come out more than that from the top line, if you will.
And I guess one of the, I don't know if it's an outcome or an issue that comes out of things like precarious work and the gig economy from that, right?
Absolutely.
Is that
Absolutely.
fractional approach, right?
Absolutely. And the life of a modern retail worker is horrible. It's just horrible. The scheduling is just dreadful. They can be scheduled to do a shift from, a single mom can be scheduled to do a shift from 3 to 11 o'clock one day, and the next day from 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. with 1 week notice, right? So, but all of that is in the spirit of efficiency, and it's efficiency gone over the edge, right? As I say, love is a really, really good thing. Obsessive love is not, right?
Right.
Obsessive love is what causes people to murder loved ones and the like, right? But love is not bad. Love is good. Efficiency is good. The obsessive degree to which we've taken efficiency has gone too far. And what it's done is put kind of pressure on economic systems that has turned them from being more normally distributed to Pareto. Now, these are sort of geeky terms. I don't like using geeky terms, but we generally think of the economy. The conception of the economy is that of a bell curve, right? Because we always talk about for an economy to advance from developing to a developed advanced economy, it's got to have the emergence of a big middle class. Well, that's the bulge in the middle of the bell curve, right?
That was the 1950s, mid-50s, right? Seen as one of the hallmark of economic growth in America.
Absolutely. Right? And then we always knew, you can't create perfection on the planet. There would be a tale of rich people and a tale of poor people, but a good economy, a good democratic capitalist economy, Canada being a good example, has progressive taxation to tax more from the rich to provide a better life for the poor. And the idea was if we ran the economy well, that bell curve would just sort of march to the right? So that the median income would just rise and rise and rise and rise, and so the poor people would get less poor, and the median income would get richer, and that's how it worked. And for 200 years, that's how the U.S. economy worked. Then around 1976, the increase in the median income the bell curve shifting in a positive way, ground to almost a halt, right? A quarter the annual progress of the previous 50 years, right? So
there must have been something that did that. And I think I've heard you talk about what was that trigger, or what was that event that would suddenly take 200 years and turn it into not so great. What was that?
It was this going past the point of kind of optimal, taking efficiency from being something good that helped move that economy forward to something that transformed the shape of it. And essentially, the shape of it is the Pareto curve, which is named after Wilfredo Pareto, because he observed around the turn of the 20th century, is when his research was, 1896, that 20% of Italians owned 80% of the land in Italy. It's the 80-20 rule, which says that and if you think about the curve on the y-axis, it's number of occurrences. On the x-axis, it's whatever you're measuring, and so there, 80% of Italians, so a big stack of them, owned little or no land. Right, so that was a big bar, and then way out on the curve were the few Italians who owned lots of land. So it's sort of bowed curve that looks more like a ski slope than a bell. And so what we've inadvertently done is convert a lot of bells into ski slopes, including in business. Right, what are we worried about now? The monopolies or near monopolies of Facebook, Google, Netflix, right? Amazon heading in that direction.
We haven't seen much activity from the Justice Department, who used to step in when they step into Microsoft, and they said you have to break up Explorer. That many would credit to being the birth of Google.
Yes.
Like Google wouldn't exist if there wasn't that kind of intersection.
Well, and you are absolutely right. And the Sherman antitrust law was passed in 1890. So that was the start of antitrust enforcement. And that lasted until 1982. And between 1982 and 1997, a 15-year period, the antitrust guidelines were changed a number of times to incorporate the efficiency defense. So you can now defend monopolizing something if you can show that it's more efficient. Now, what does efficient mean? It means that you can reduce costs. So two companies can merge and show that they can reduce costs, and so they're more efficient. That's like, it couldn't be farther from the spirit of antitrust laws. I don't care if you're more efficient. In fact, if it is a super duper efficiency gain, like running electrical cables around the province of Ontario, right? We do allow it to be a monopoly, but what do we do with that monopoly?
We regulate.
Exactly. So we have all these regulated public utilities, water, electricity, etc. So we said, if there's that kind of efficiency argument where it's just insane to have two parallel lines of hydro across, it would just be stupid. We call it a public utility and regulate it. But otherwise, we break these things up or don't allow monopolies to take shape because it's bad for the customers. They can extract everything they want from the customer, the poor customers who have no choice, and they have no incentive to innovate and get better over time. Monopolies exist to serve themselves. Right.
Now, the argument that discussion around Amazon, AWS, and their advertising service, they would say, in terms of those three businesses, the AWS, their core retail business, and their advertising business that sits on top on the flywheel that drives it all, is that there's a net benefit of all those things being connected to the consumer. And just as Walmart in years past had said, listen, overall, we've reduced the cost of living 10%. Yet, when you think about Amazon and its cross-funding, there are many calls for the Justice Department to intercede because they've just become too dominant, but not in the traditional way we and you were defining it.
It's sort of yes and no. So I do think in some things they aren't dominant, right? In other things they are. So online advertising, they are, and they're behaving exceedingly badly, right? The EU has fined them almost $10 billion for just doing things that blatantly are bad for the world, right? Just like they're just unquestionably bad, right? If you use this service, you are not allowed to use my competitor service, right? That's just bad, right? It's saying I am powerful enough to cause you to not be able to do something that would be good for you and you'd like to do. So I just plain don't buy the argument. Now, in retailing, they are not a monopolist in retailing. There's lots of other ways to get stuff. They're not a monopolist in AWS. In fact, Microsoft now is giving them a real run for their money, and Google Cloud is not doing a bad job either. So I don't mind what's happening in cloud. There are three very viable competitors duking it out, but I don't like what's happening in online advertising because Amazon is behaving just plain badly. And when that happens, we have to say, that this efficiency argument is not an efficiency argument that's consistent with democratic capitalism. Because here's the rub, Michael. The interesting thing about the combination of democracy and capitalism, which I happen to like, it's my favorite way of organizing a country, a democracy that is capitalist, and it requires essentially the 51st percentile family to say this works for me. Now, not strictly. I mean, I'm lining them up from the poorest family to the richest family and saying the 51st percentile is a swing voter. It might not be exactly that. It might be somebody around there. But by and large, if the 51st percentile voter or 51st percentile family doesn't say this system is working for me, it'll be changed, right? And that's what happened in the Great Depression. If you looked at the advanced economies that were in existence around the Great Depression, a whole bunch of them, if not a majority of them, went either fascist, socialist, or communist. America and Canada stuck to democratic capitalism, shifted left, the U.S., New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but really stayed democratic capitalist. So at times when the economy fails for the median voter, they vote for something else, and the history of what they vote for ain't great I think for the world. And I said this. That was the premise of this study in 2013. We did not have 40% of Americans in 2013 saying socialism, I'd consider that. And more than that of young Americans saying that. So my thesis is if we don't get the median family income rising in the way that it was for the first 200 years of America's history, we're going to have changes, and we're not necessarily going to like them. And we're gonna have a spate of blowing things up, right? What's happened since I started the book called Bernie Sanders and saying socialism, is a potential way to go. We've had Brexit, where the voters just said, "I'm going to blow it up." Many Trump voters, when asked, "Did you really think?" You go and ask a Trump voter, "Did you really think he's going to bring back a whole lot of coal jobs to the U.S. and whatever?" And they would say, "No. Well, why the hell did you vote for him?" And the answer was, for a substantial portion of them, I just wanted to blow it up. Right. I wanted to blow up that swamp or drain the swamp, blow up that structure in Washington. So we're seeing, and apparently this may be apocryphal, but the number one Google search term the morning after Brexit was, "What is the EU?" right?
Come on.
No, yeah. So we're going to blow this thing up that we barely understand. And I'm not saying people,
because it's changed.
Yeah, it's changed. Exactly.
The system's not working for me. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
There's someone saying that they're going to change, and I'm just going to follow.
And I do not want to get into making the sort of some argument that these people are stupid. Absolutely not. These people are frustrated. They've been told this is going to work for you, and it hasn't. And they say, well, then we're going to take it into our own hands and make a substantial change. And in my view, that was the Donald Trump election and Brexit was.
And that's been said with, whether it's Brexit or whether it's free trade. Is that free trade hasn't benefited the people. I guess it's an ongoing kind of theme. So paraphrasing Winston Churchill, talked about democracy. It's a flawed system, but it's better than the alternatives. What's next? What are your recommendations, kind of top 3 recommendations? And you talk about this in the book. Where do we go from here?
Well,
what can we do? What can be done?
I think it's to appreciate the role of Slack buffers and Slack, and we will now with COVID, I think more automatically. 2 is recognize that the economy is not a machine. The economy is more a complex adaptive system. The economy is more like the Amazon jungle than it is an automobile. And so recognize that with complex adaptive systems, you can't get perfect answers. And so politicians keep fighting for what's the perfect answer to fix everything. Is it Sarbanes-Oxley? Is it Dodd-Frank? Instead, we got to actually do something that Canada's done. I love the Bank Act. Right, the Canadian Bank Act, when it was created 4 years after we became a country, had a 10-year revision built into it. So revising the Bank Act is not a political act. It's an act of obeying the law. The law says you must revise it every 10 years, although literally 25 years ago, that was shifted to 5 years. And I think it's wise, which is things change, things evolve. And so anything that you built for the pre-evolved situation isn't going to be right. And so we keep revising them. And it's no surprise to me that the Canadian banking system stood up exceedingly well in the global financial crisis, whereas the U.S. didn't. So we need to think about tweaking and revising and revising and revising and revising. There is no perfection. There is just journey towards something that is more perfect. And citizens have to think about multi-homing. Okay, so citizens have a role to play in this. So any citizen who says, "I'm going to get all my news from Facebook, I'm going to buy all my stuff from Amazon Prime, I'm going to watch all my shows on Netflix," is contributing to Pareto outcomes. They're contributing to the monopolization and everything going to one. So to strike a blow against that, to make things more bell curved rather than Pareto curve, citizens should just say, maybe I like Facebook best for my news, but I'm going to subscribe to a newspaper too, or I'm going to watch CBC or CTV.
Or I'm going to shop from my local indie every now and then on Main Street, rather than head to the big box store. Not all the time, but
exactly.
I risk a more robust ecosystem that's more organic.
Exactly.
I guess
not all the time. You don't have to do it all the time. I'm not saying don't use Amazon Prime, don't use Netflix, don't use Facebook. No, just multi-home. If you like Uber, do Uber some of the time, Lyft some of the time, and your local yellow cab some of the time. So all of these things are just little things. The book, for what it's worth, takes a different tack. Almost all books on the economy are literally 80% diagnosis and 20% prescription. Mine is 60% prescription.
I was going to say, to be precise, you say 57%,
yes.
Which made me laugh. Yeah. I know it's 57% solutions.
But the other thing is that all recommendations, there are 18 of them, 100% of them have been done successfully before or are being done successfully now somewhere. So I'm not focusing on doing theoretical things that haven't been done before. I'm just saying we need to do more of stuff that works in order to guide this economy back towards an economy where that median person prospered, because back to your Winston Churchill, I do believe democracy and capitalism are the best systems for humanity, and we just have to dial back the crazed, obsessive pursuit of efficiency to a level where we can say this is the characteristics of a great economy. The median family, in most years, it's not going to be perfect, in most years, their life advances, and we create enough wealth in the economy that we can tax the rich in a way that isn't onerous or terrible, to make it a better life for the poor. That's a great economy, and I think both the U.S. and Canada should have that as their aspiration.
Last question for you. I know you wrote the book prior to the COVID crisis, but as you think about the book, its conclusions, its action, how do you see COVID? We've talked in this interview about habits and habits being broken and new habits being formed. And I think that applies to government. I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to go back to having no PPE supplies and stock houses. I mean, that's taught everyone some lesson anyway. We'll see if it sticks. Do you see, let me phrase it, do you see the COVID crisis as positive in terms of moving this agenda forward, or negative, or is it really too early to tell what the implication of the shock is going to be?
It's probably in the too early to tell. Like this is the classic answer here is it depends, right? It really depends on what the reactions are. I think there's some really profound lessons. One is in slack, right? Having a little slack in the system, having a few extra ventilators ain't such a dumb idea.
Right.
Anymore.
A few extra staff in the nursing home. Yep. Not so bad.
And then the other one is I do have a bit in the book about connectedness, and you can also get more Pareto when you're too overconnected. And I think there's going to be a lesson from COVID about just how connected the economies are, right? The economy of northern Italy, there's a reason why there was a breakout in northern Italy. It's because a bunch of Wuhan Chinese companies had invested in northern Italy, right? It's just as simple as that. So understanding the connectedness, and understanding that sometimes you've got to build in buffers and circuit breakers and the like. And we, I think, as a global economy, have merrily taken all of them away and said, "Hey, no problem," right? Mm-hmm. But we've figured out, like in the stock market, there are circuit breakers, right, where we say we can actually de-link these things when we need to take a pause. And I think the world is going to have to think a lot more about delinking some things. If you want, I will put in a pitch in something we did at the Rotman School, which is I think we also have to. There's a chapter on educators. Educators have got to just tone down the reductionism. Reductionism is taught as a meritorious thing, right? And getting the right answer is taught as a meritorious thing, right? Certainty is taught. So certainty and reductionism is the core of our education system. And I think that COVID-19 is showing us that being able to think more holistically and not think that you've got the perfect answer, so you can just rest on your perfect answer, is the way the world works. And the countries, I think, that are doing best and will continue to do best are the ones that don't get fixed on something and say, this is what we're going to do. They actually say, this is the best we can think of right now. We're going to watch and adjust and tweak and tweak and tweak. We teach our youngsters exactly the opposite. We teach them there's a right answer, and the pursuit of the right answer is what you're into. And you would know,
what
right?
you're rewarded for.
Yeah, and you would know the only way you got into your business school of choice was to get a high enough GMAT. And then look at what the GMAT was. I mean, yes, there was a little writing component to it that isn't this, but the vast majority of it is a bunch of multiple choice questions with A, B, C, D, and E, or A, B, C, D. And if you got the right ones more often than not, you got to go to the business school of your choosing. And if you got the wrong ones too often, you didn't, right? So what are we teaching? We're teaching there is a certain right answer. In a complex adaptive system, there is no certain right answer. And there never will be a certain right answer. They're just ones that head us in better directions and worse directions. And the ones that head you in better directions are the ones that take into account more features of this complex system, not fewer. And so this is my MBA education. Literally says we can teach you something about marketing, something about accounting, something about finance, something about operations, something about HR, and you will be able to go out into the world and put them together. No, actually, the vast majority of MBAs who graduate can never put them together because they got zero help from their school. And that's one of the big bets I made at the Rotman School, to say, no, we have to teach for that, for the kind of world that we actually live in, not the sort of the machine metaphor world that is a fantasy in some bureaucrat's mind.
So your book's out in September, mm-hmm. right? But available for pre-order now. Yes. I'd love to circle back with you in September, and we'll have a different lens on what's transpired over the next couple of months and see your perception on that when you launch your book. In the interim, how can my listeners learn more about you, or learn more, get in touch if they'd like, but how can they learn more about the work you're doing?
Well, I've been, because I write so much, I've invested in putting that all in an easily found place that's reasonably organized, and it's www.rogerlmartin.com. So my middle initial is L for Lloyd, named after my father. So rogerlmartin.com, and you'll find everything that I've written on strategy, on design, on democratic capitalism, on compensation, on social innovation, all kind of reasonably organized videos and articles and all that. And lots about the new book on there. So that's what I would recommend. And I'm just Roger at rogerlmartin.com. And if you've got a question that I've raised here in your mind, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Well, you've been very generous with your time, Roger. It's such a treat to speak with you. It's great to hear your voice again. I've missed that for a couple of years since seeing you live at the Rotman School, and I want to thank you for being on The Voice of Retail and sharing your insights. And like I said, I'd love to circle back in the fall when we've got a few months perspective and when the book's coming out, and see what you think.
Sure.
So once again, thanks for being here for The Voice of Retail, and I hope you stay safe and have a great day.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It was lots of fun, and let's look back and do it again.
Hi, this is Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Join us on our brand new podcast, The Food Professor, together with Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast. We'll look at the hot issues in the food service, grocery, and restaurant industries, discuss proprietary industry and consumer food related research. Check out fresh new ideas and talk about half-baked strategies. Available on iTunes, Spotify, all the major podcasting platforms, debuting in May.
Thanks to Roger for being my guest on this episode and my generous sponsor, Omnovus. I'll return next week with more great interviews and with the top retail stories from Retail This Week. That's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or on your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc., and you can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.